Thank you very much for having me today. You might assume that the airline pilot is used to addressing this many people, but normally I do so from behind a bulletproof door. And my audience normally can't leave either, whereas you are free when I start to get boring. Today I'm also appreciative of the fact that I'm going to bring two things that cause a fair amount of anxiety and pile them together, flying and diabetes, but hopefully during the course of this speech and maybe over lunch, I can allay some fears. Timeline-wise, my career, I was diagnosed in 2016, so I am still fairly new, so I've got a lot to learn here today as well, listening to the other speakers. When I was a child, I remember looking into a coach and saying to my father that I wanted to be a coach driver when I grow up. All the dials and the buttons and the steering wheel, it all looked very, very cool to me, and I got a clip around the ear hole. My father wanted me to be a doctor. I refused to go to university. I knew that I was going to have to spend a lot of money on my flying, and that meant that I found myself undereducated and pretty skint when my father pulled out the financial support. Nothing much has changed today, actually, after 12 years of flying. I ended up funding my own PPL by doing various different jobs. 9/11 unfortunately saw all the sponsorships around the world dry up, and that left me thinking of ways to fund it myself. I joined the RAF. I did 2 months with the RAF and realized that I wasn't a killing machine. I was more of a holiday kind of guy. So I resigned for the RAF and I set up a small distribution business to help me fund my flying. This helped get my dad back on side. He realized that it wasn't just a whimsical dream, that it was actually something I was going to go through with. That said, I still became a bus driver whilst I was doing my distance learning course, just because it's good to irritate your parents every now and then. And I did really enjoy that job, actually. It was fantastic. Fortunately for me, at the end of my training, and the reason I say it's fortunate is because some people finish their training and they don't walk straight into a flying job, so they're carrying huge amounts of debt and then find themselves unemployed for quite a long period of time. I ended up, I've forgotten about the slides. Let's get past this one because that was just the intro. I ended up getting a job with Flybe, a little turboprop regional airline, and that was some of the funnest flying I think I've ever done in my life. It's also where I met some great friends and my fantastic wife, stereotypical there, and we now have two beautiful kids. One of them spends most of his time asleep, takes after his father. Flybe have fluctuated in their financial stability over the years, and that saw us facing redundancies. I took the money and ran. We went over to the Middle East, where we spent 2.5 years in Dubai. That was also great flying out there, but it was mainly to a war zone, so it was a little bit tetchy from time to time. Anyway, finally, I got the long-haul dream job that I'd always wanted. I had a lovely family. I felt that I was the luckiest guy. We moved back to the UK, and everything looked good. 7 months in, though, I still didn't really feel particularly happy. My father had been diagnosed with dementia. His business was spiraling out of control. People were coming to me expecting me to support them. We couldn't get the tenant out of our house, having moved back from Dubai, which then saw us having difficulty selling the house. We were living with my ever-patient mother-in-law. Stress was pretty high. We were pretty worn out, and I decided it was time for me to not be flying aeroplanes. I phoned work up and said, look, I need some time off for some counselling whilst we figure this out. Whilst I was doing the counselling, we were sat in bed one night watching Netflix, snaffling a giant packet of fruit pastels, and Carmen said, well, I'm going to Google these other symptoms you've got, you know, the frequent going to the toilet, the drinking pints and pints of water at night, and see what that comes up with. And of course, Google's always negative and says, well, you might have diabetes. And we sat there laughing to ourselves. Of course, I don't have diabetes. Silly old Google. So, long story short, there were a few GP mistakes, bit of a misdiagnosis, and I ended up being carried into Partha's office. At 34 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but Partha did tell me that we would get my airline medical back. I found that very hard to believe at first, but here we are. There's one missing there? Have I gone past it already? I think we may have gone for the first one. Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute. So who here thinks that pilots aren't allowed to make mistakes? Show of hands, please. Okay, that's not too many. That's pretty good. You're either half asleep or you're very forward-thinking people. To err is human, and to forgive is divine, especially if you have diabetes. That was written by Alexander Pope, and the last bit added by me. I was introduced to this in flight training, and it was a change in mentality for aviation training. Previously, we were all gods of the sky. We don't make mistakes. But how can you avoid mistakes if you're so arrogant that you don't believe that you can make them? And this attitude skyrocketed our safety standards in aviation. We now openly admit our faults and our mistakes, and we discuss them. We discuss them on a smaller basis, so day-to-day little things, and we also report them on a larger scale so that the company can then address them and perhaps make changes if changes are necessary. It's now mandated that every day we do a post-flight review, and we'll discuss what went well, what we could do better, and how. So that's what went well, what could be done better, and how. Sometimes we might not have anything to talk about, so we just talk about how great we are. Other times we might have made minor issues. You know, maybe we slipped up in our PA to the passengers, maybe we've taken a delay. What can we do to improve that? How can we improve our fuel economy? Those sorts of things, and they're all open for review. So I'd like to have a chat about how I applied that with diabetes. There it is. Thought that might happen. Anyway, I'm going to put that down at the bottom just because I think it's relevant for all of us as diabetics, just to keep in the back of our minds all the time. So regaining my medical, can I get rid of it? Will it go away? No. I needed 3 months of stable readings. The good news was I got 3 months of sick pay. So that's great stuff. I'm on to a good start already. However, that first month was a mess, an absolute mess, as I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. I did struggle a lot. I never really thought that I was ever going to be able to get control of my diabetes, let alone get enough control that I could go back to flying an aeroplane again. There was a lot of stresses still at home. We still had those strains. My father, there was a big strain being put on the family around me whilst I was getting angry. I'm a fairly moody guy anyway, but I got even more moody with this newfound condition. That said, I had to come up with a strategy, and I needed a toolkit that I could use to get control of it. I got the Carbs and Cals app, read the book Think Like a Pancreas, Freestyle Libre, although I now use a Dexcom G5, the Notes app on my phone, a very patient wife, and lots of repetition. This is what I wrote in the Notes app. So what am I eating? What's the snack? What the carb content should be? What's my insulin to carb ratio, which is obviously ever changing? The amount of insulin I took for that meal, the time the insulin was taken, and perhaps a split dosage, the reading before, the reading after, whether it was a success or whether I failed, and then a review. Now, the success and the fail thing, it's not really a fail, is it? It's just the fact that we need to review it. So, for example, I like curry. I love eating curry, and we fly to India a lot, and I want to be able to eat a curry when I go there. And I've now got a pass next to my note for curry, so I can eat it fairly confidently now. There are 15 fails before that, where I ended up waking up at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning, massively high, followed by, again, at 6 o'clock in the morning, very, very low, until I got the hang of it. But it's okay to make mistakes, and we can review. What went well? What can we do differently? And how can we improve? My note is now full of interesting meals, snacks, and things that I can manage, and I've got a structure to them, and I can be fairly certain that I'm going to be able to manage those meals well. So, with regard to actual flying, the UK CAA is very, very pioneering in its attitude towards medical conditions. This was a recent change. A man with HIV can train as an airline pilot after ban is reversed. It's not to say that the CAA will allow anyone with any condition just to turn up and get a medical. That's not what they do. But what they look at is that condition manageable? Can we come up with a safe protocol, safe guidelines that can be adhered to, and then put those into practice? And then once that's approved, they take everyone on an individual case-by-case basis. Can you adhere to our protocol? Can you meet these safety standards and can you uphold them? If that's the case, then there's no reason for people to be discriminated against. So for me, I needed to get through the 3 months of blood tests. I then needed a series of other health checks to make sure that diabetes hadn't already made any damages to my body that could affect the safety of a flight. A nice report from Partha helped. And I now have to go in for a review every 3 months. During the flight, I have to test 1 hour before report, and that's basically to give the company the heads up of whether I'm going to be fit to work or not, so they can call someone else in. Half an hour before takeoff, every hour in flight, my longest flight's 14 hours. Half an hour before landing, and then of course there are certain complications that can take place, such as a missed approach due to bad weather, and then we might take up a hold, and then it's a case of retesting that blood sugar during the hold. I've now got over 1,000 hours of flying with diabetes. I feel that I'm a better pilot because of it. I have a much brighter outlook on my job. It's very easy to be complacent when you do something on a regular basis. And it just becomes normal. You know, we fly to all these lovely destinations and it's just the way it is. Whereas for me now, I look at it and go, I nearly lost this. I could have lost it. But I've worked very, very hard to get it back again. And I take that happiness and pleasure of my job every day. A recent report from the Civil Aviation Authority covering 4,900 hours of diabetic flying has shown that there hasn't been a single safety incident that could be attributed to a pilot with diabetes. We've got another 3 years of data now, and there's more pilots involved, there's more countries getting involved as well with this protocol. And we're now paving the way for a future where, like HIV, initial medicals can be granted to young, aspiring pilots. That's where we need to get to, and that's what I want to see in the future. So, as a review, because I've harped on about reviewing, to err is human, to forgive is divine, and that's really, really true and important for all of us as diabetics, particularly those of us that are struggling to get it under control. We can make mistakes. It's okay to make those mistakes, but it's important that we go back and look at why, not to panic, not to get stressed, not to throw a huge amount of extra insulin at that high, but to sit there and think, what went wrong? Did I get the dosage right? Did I get the carb count right? And then adjust, try again. So my speech has actually gone incredibly quickly, which is good, right? That gives us some more time for some questions. I mainly want to say thank you to everyone here for turning up today, for all of the people that do charity work, to the NHS staff particularly. Without their support and their strength and their determination to help us, things would be a lot harder. I'm not a social media person, because if I so much as sneeze on the flight deck, the tabloids will get hold of it and twist it. So please take my number, take my email address, please get in touch with anything, whether it be a fear of flying, something about your diabetes, or how do you get into it. Please ask me. Ready?
Hey, I'll come on this side. What a story. Quote of the day, I wasn't a killing machine, more of a holiday kind of guy. I like that a lot. That's a good philosophy for life.
Caribbean over Kabul anytime.
Great. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what was going through your head in that first month or so when you had so much information to take on and also contemplating the fact that your career wasn't potentially going to be your career anymore.
Yeah. For me, I think really the career did slip into the back of my mind. You've got to get control of the diabetes first. With that mentality, then you can get control of the diabetes and then you can start thinking about the career again.
And sort of, at what point did you feel like, okay, maybe I can do this, maybe this is going to be all right? And what contributed to that feeling? Was it
it's the networking thing again, actually. I was very lucky. I was put in touch with a guy who was conveniently exactly 3 months ahead of me.
Helpful.
Another diabetic pilot. So he was going through the protocol and he had had the month of lows and highs and I'm never going to get through this. And he said, it's okay, mate, about a month and a half in, it all clicks and you start getting the hang of it and you start learning and getting control. So that was my motivation. He was a great source of help.
How many pilots who are diabetics are there?
Type 1s, I believe I'm number 28, and I think I'm the last one. There may have been someone after me since, but yeah, 28 of us at the moment in the UK. There's Ireland, Austria, and I believe Luxembourg are just joining us as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And you're really changing the course for people in the future, because as I said, this is just something obviously pilot was up there on my career choices, but you know, this is something I just thought I'd never do. It's never too late, guys. Yeah, well, you might be inspiring the children who are here today, thinking, yes, I can do that. And that long list, can we talk about that? I am terrible for, you know, going hypo at lunch because I got distracted by shopping and then stepping back and...
We were just saying, actually, we had sushi for breakfast this morning, and I went the other way. I went, great, I'm going to give a speech about diabetes, and it's going to be skyrocketing, and the alarm's going to be going off.
Well, that's exactly why I did what I did. That's what I was trying to avoid, and boy, did I avoid it. I forgot what I was going to say. I never, and I'm terrible at this, step back and go, okay, review. What happened here? What did I do wrong? I mean, I well know what I did wrong. How did you document all that? Did you have a spreadsheet? Like, tell me.
Just on the Notes app. So
right.
Actually, that list, I would write down all the bits next to that list. And then at the end of it, it's a case of looking back at where your readings are, where you ended up, whether it was the right reading that you wanted or not. And then you go through the review process. But what did I do wrong? Did I get, dig the wrapper back out of the recycling and go, oh, it's per 100 grams, not per...
And as you said, you think it's made you a better pilot?
Yes, absolutely. I think when you nearly lose something, you learn to appreciate it a lot more. And then when you return to it, and every day I go back to work, it's just that happier place to go, this is really important to keep hold of.
Awesome. And have you ever had a scary hypo or encounter on a flight?
No.
Wow. Isn't that awesome? Right. Thank you very much, Mike. Amazing.
Thank you.